Welcome to Cybersecurity Today, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. This week we have our regular panel. We've got Terry Cutler, head of Cyology Labs. Terry, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
David Shipley, head of Beauceron Security. David?
Thanks for having me once again.
And today we have a special guest for our panel, Dana Proctor. She's a security services leader for Canada for IBM. Dana, welcome.
Well, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you gentlemen today. Look forward to our conversation.
Great. So, Dana, since you're new to our panel, can we get like a couple of sentences to tell you what you do, what's your job, what you've been doing,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I have the pleasure of spending a lot of time with a lot of different clients doing various different things, all surrounding security. I've been at this for a little over a few decades right now, evolving from the traditional anti-spam firewall conversation through to now to more complex items, certainly around incident response. My background really leans into the threat management security operations center and really working with clients on how best are we spending, how best are we doing, and what ways are we stopping those hackers that seem to be getting more and more prevalent and more efficient. That's a little bit about what I do every day.
Cool. Great. Well, welcome to the panel. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start out with the usual format for the audience knows it. We'll bring up some stories of the past week and give us a chance to have a deeper dive and a deeper discussion on all of those stories that have happened, or at least the major ones that have happened. One I'm going to start with is the Toronto School Board got hacked. And the Toronto School Board, and this made international news, the Toronto District School Board is Canada's largest school board. They've got close to 600 schools and over 235,000 children enrolled. So they confirmed a data breach affecting the student information, and that breach seems to stem from a ransomware attack discovered in June. Does anybody want to jump in on this story? Did anybody caught it this week?
Yeah, a couple of things. Unfortunately, this is the second sort of cybersecurity headline within 12 months for Toronto District School Board. And so, this is just an example of how many school districts are constantly being pounded. And we've seen hacks, out west with school districts in Manitoba, British Columbia. We've seen incredibly catastrophic school district attacks in the United States, in Los Angeles and Minneapolis. And you might think, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen here? Maybe some student SIN numbers, maybe grades. No, we're talking about psychological reports on kids. We're talking about employee reports. We're talking about allegation investigations of sexual misconduct and worse can be included in these kinds of breaches. So it can be bad. That doesn't look like it's a case in this in terms of a test data set being exposed, but it's the incredible pressure on the higher ed system. And when you look at the size of these organizations, how much they rely on IT and how underfunded this function is, it is stunning. We do some really interesting work now where we are actually helping educators throughout the entire province of New Brunswick. And it's a lot of work and helping them understand how they can play a better role protecting themselves, but also the incredibly powerful role that technology plays and will continue to play. So school districts have been number one with a bullet, as they used to say in the radio charts, for ransomware gangs for the last couple of years, until public policymakers and government start allocating more funding and prioritization for this versus just new buildings versus just the staffing. And I know there's challenges. This is part of the Canadian boom of our population growth, but we're not keeping pace with protecting our systems. And that's not unique to this school district.
And not just that, you have to also deal with students too, right? Because whenever we get hard to do penetration tests, we're always faced with these students that have this challenge. They want to hack into the system, change their grade, right? They always have that challenge too. So, they got hundreds or thousands of students that are trying to attack the internal network if they watch a couple of YouTube videos. So they got to watch for internal threat as well.
I think you're spot on for both aspects. It's that crime paradigm that we bring up as well. The motivation is there. The proliferation, and I think, Terry, that's where you're going, is the interconnectivity of the board systems is not being kept in pace with the controls being brought in. So when you look at the three of we're connecting more, the controls aren't keeping up, and it's highly motivated. Like you said, the ransomware groups are making good money, right? They're being successful. It's a lucrative track for them. The challenge is for the Toronto School Board, I worry that there's a great fatigue. I worry that there's a great fatigue of, it's just more data.
Yep.
It's just
I
more
think there's also
planning.
an issue where there's not enough network monitoring happening,
Mhm.
because a lot of times these attackers, as I mentioned countless times in previous podcasts, the average time that a hacker is in your network is 280 something days. And during this time, there's always beacons going out. So if your solution is relying on logs, it's not going to necessarily pick that up. So if you've got solutions that have full packet capture, for example, that can see these beaconings going out, it's going to help you spot anomalies in your network.
We've talked about this, that school boards are constantly under attack. This one has another classic. And by the way, David, I did check back. They got, and this is sad, they got only student names, school names, grades, email addresses, and student numbers and partial birth dates. So because it was a test system. Now, where we heard this before, Terry, you've seen this before. What is it with people not understanding that test systems are exposed to the internet? It just to see the same error come up time and time again is amazing.
That's actually helped us in our engagements, actually. So we have some systems that were inside some of these clients. They left it unpatched on purpose so they can test upgrades and things like this. But it allowed us to break into that system, download the hash information of all the passwords that have been encrypted, and I could do a pass the hash attack and log into all the other computers without ever knowing what these passwords are. And so that vulnerable system has opened the door to us to access all the other hundreds of systems. So it needs to be monitored.
Well, and when we talk about people, process, and culture, when it comes to technology, no one sets out to create a test system and leave it vulnerable. Why does it happen? You have to look back and say, okay, how busy were folks? What were their systems and processes? What were the checks and balances? And oftentimes in these IT teams, you're talking about folks that have everything piled on their desks. They got a backlog that goes back 12 months. They're trying to balance things. They are working miracles to keep this network up and running. Oh, here's our next cool new project thing, X, Y, or Z. Do it all. It's just like watching someone juggle flaming torches. You're going to get burned. It's so easy to turn around and say, bad admit, look at you, you didn't do your job. But what were the conditions that they were working under that led to this? I thought a lot of the work that was done in the auto industry by things like the Toyota production system, total quality system, right? The ability to stop, fix, perfect, and refine and get there. It just doesn't have the attention or resources or care. And I think that's the last point I want to end with this. This is going to continue to happen until executives, until government, until others care more.
Well, they think IT does it all, right? Yeah, IT's got it covered, but they're not cybersecurity experts. And a lot of times they don't have the budget to bring in an IT firm to come in and do an audit on these things, because it can be very expensive, especially at a school their size.
Remember, guys, too, that this is the largest school board in Canada. There's a school board near me that has, I have no idea how many, but way, way less students and way, way less revenue. And they're just an easy mark compared to Toronto.
Yep.
I always find it amazing that in our system of government, that the bigger governments, like the provincial government in particularly, that's responsible for education in our constitution, will always step in when there's something they disagree with. The silence is deadly when it comes to funding things or making standards for cybersecurity across the province. Am I missing this? Is anybody else
No,
catching anything that the province?
We've done audits on school boards that have over 20,000 students in it. Only 4 IT guys work there.
I think this is the industry norm as well, right? And certainly that cost of data breach is not going down. The numbers are increasing. My worry is exactly to your point, to that fatigue that I mentioned earlier, because to your point, David, governments usually respond when there's public outcry. Where are the parents from that school board saying, well, wait a second, I didn't want my child's information, so what can we do differently? And it's not buying a simple technology. It's got to be a cultural change. And the reality is the sysadmins, there's a reason why they're scarce skills. You look on a job board right now, there's a lot of skill set needed. We don't have it. It's hard to bring people into this industry because it's such a broad industry. Security crosses so many aspects of a business. You've got to be business savvy. You've got to enable that interconnectivity. You've got to enable the latest innovation while convincing them that they need to do it without being the business prevention unit. I can't stop the business, but I need to do it securely.
Well,
How we do that, it's often an island of one saying, well, hold on. and then doing it after the fact, right? Honestly, where people say, stop, we're just throwing money at things after the fact, ahead of time, when we're, bringing Wi-Fi into a school. Really? Is it really just putting Wi-Fi connectors all around the school? No. To your point, Terry, we need to actually be doing it within an overall strategy, and that it is penetration tested regularly.
There's also other issues that are happening where the IT guys are facing issues with teachers because a lot of these teachers are retiring soon and they don't want to put in that 8-digit or 20-digit password. They just want their stuff to work. So they're constantly pounding IT. Oh, my stuff's not working. Get it fixed. So then IT will actually make maybe a misconfiguration to accommodate that teacher, but now they've made the system vulnerable.
The duality. Yep.
Yeah. And speaking of stories that just keep continuing, MoveIT is still claiming victims. And this time it's the Texas Dow Employees Credit Union, or the TDECU. That sounds so much smoother. They've disclosed a data breach. Now, they've got, and I can't figure this one out, they've got data on over 500,000 individuals, and they only have like 360,000 members. So who knows that this is more than their entire membership. So I don't know what the data is, but the breach was linked again back to this MoveIT software hack, and they discovered it a year later. And again, this is sensitive data not that the student data wasn't, but social security numbers, financial account details, all kinds of things that could be used in hacking people and in phishing people. Dana, you comments on this?
I think the MoveIT hack and MoveIT all in itself is just a brilliant conversation, because MoveIT is a great technology. It's a great tool. We use it a fair amount. It's a great file transfer tool. I haven't yet been able to find the stat on this, but I was told, so I'm going to pass it on, that I do believe it's probably fairly accurate, that it was one of the largest insurance payouts because of how widespread the use was. Then it was unknown. So I imagine a lot of our policies will be revising based on this. But it really begs we brought in a tool that was very easy, and the point of teachers wanting to move and do things easily, but it wasn't implemented in a way, and I'm being very arrogant looking back in hindsight right now, that allowed all of the considerations around who accessed it, how often were you able to access, what was the policy for what you could use, how are we using this tool, how do we enable our workforce, our colleagues, our partners to use a transfer system with our coveted information? How are we doing that consciously? And the MoveIT, the fact that I fully believe, Jim, that there's many other organizations, we're just not knowing about it, that MoveIT hack continues to make vulnerable.
A trusted tool set that you don't think about. And how many tool sets get brought in on that are cloud operated, that they're not part of our regular systems? You don't have to consider these from a security point of view. And this one, and I think, Dana, you're absolutely right. It may not be the largest in terms of volume, although I might be, I don't know. But in terms of insurance, it's probably a lot of lights are going off, because they had so many companies. One of the reasons that they gave that they hadn't actually spotted the hack was they had so many companies there. They posted them on one of their sites and they missed a few. They just had so many big companies that they could tackle, that these guys with 500,000 members fell off the list.
So fun fact about Klop, which is the Russian gang. Klop is a slang saying for a blood-sucking tick. So that tells you a lot about them. I think Dana said something really interesting, right? It was a transit tool. This was meant to be the train that moved the goods. It was never meant to be the data warehouse. And when you look back at the organizations that got hit hard and the length of years that data was in there, is that they used it as a data warehouse as opposed to a system that made it easier and more secure, definitely more secure than people emailing stuff to these organizations. Absolutely. So it was safe in transit, but it was not safe at rest. And that distinction was lost. I'm not going to, I usually like to beat on them for the SQL injection vulnerability, but the truth is every software is going to have flaws. This one just happened to be one of those OWASP top 10s. Yeah. But the other part about the MoveIT story is really interesting, because there's this theory in economics called long tail economics. And so it goes like this. We used to watch movies and we used to measure how big the performance was on the opening weekend and the follow-on weekend. So big opening numbers. And what they realized was sometimes you can have these movies that just are popular and go on all summer long. And when you look at the total sum of these, well, each day or weekend was not as high as the big blockbuster ones. The long tail economic effect was greater. And so this is our first long tail economic breach. So you didn't have one single organization. You had 15,000 with 50 million people affected. And we're now going to get our first snapshot of how long the long tail continues in this side of things. Now, the insurance side is absolutely fascinating in terms of how this is going to revise, liability, supply chain liability. And I'll end off with this. This is also why the White House in the States is fighting so hard to change the terms of software limitation of liability.
Sure.
And that's a double-edged sword. This is the driver for a big policy shift, just like Colonial Pipeline was the, oh my God, whole of government effort on ransomware. You mess with our gasoline and our cars' freedom, we're it. This now is the moment. And one last moment on the software liability, CrowdStrike's potential lawsuits between Delta is also going to be a real high pressure mark on software limitations liability.
And you don't think when this limitation of liability gets broken, and I'm not the defender of insurance companies. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to defend big financial companies, but when that gets broken, we'll have a financial collapse. Insurance companies would not be able to bear the brunt of that from the liabilities just so high.
I think what's happened is they're just going to get out of insuring these folks, like even cyber insurance. These cyber insurance companies are losing $5 for every dollar they're getting in. So at one point they're going to say, sorry, we're not going to offer this service anymore. And you're on your own data breach. You're paying your own ticket.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the riders and a lot of the policies are certainly indicating and leaning in that direction, aren't they, right? The typical spreadsheet that we filled out years ago is now pages or tabs, whichever option you go with, long. The number of considerations that it does not pay out for, should you not have that, it is there. And I think this is where, we're in insurance industry, if we lean into car and house industry, we've always known certain considerations bring down our policies and certain things will pay out and some things don't. Some of things are baffling, quite frankly, from a home insurance or a vehicle insurance that I get paid out for certain things, but not for others. I think cyber, we need to move into that direction. And I dare say that some of the conversations I've been having are starting to, where there's some common themes. If I bring this back to MoveIT, had there been some MFA, to your point, David, around the repository? Had there been requirements to show evidence that administrator passwords had been updated? If we had certain tasks no longer enabled, if we were ensuring that the actual hash that was using in the encryption was actually accurate. Well, one would argue what TLS was, what version was being run, but all the same, if we can start getting to that watermark of what good looks like within insurance to set a reasonable payout, it's, listen, I've taken these activities, I still was breached, but based on the cost that I've had, I get some remuneration, some reward, some back pay from an insurance policy. I think that would start tipping the scale from an insurance benefit to corporations. My worry right now is a lot of corporations are saying it's not worth the squeeze, right? Putting money into an insurance policy isn't there. We're seeing other things, and you probably noticed the Poneman IBM study came out just recently. Insurance wasn't a factor that a lot of people mentioned in bringing their cost of breach down. What was, did I use AI? Did I use automation? Right? Am I using law enforcement? Am I a mature organization with a breach response plan already in place? Those types of things, when MoveIT, we could interchange that with various other terms, other organizations, various other softwares. It would show that we are better prepared for it and we're taking responsibility as opposed to just looking for an insurance safeguard to it or regulations to
That's
safeguard.
one of the things I'm seeing too, is that a lot of companies, they're not filling out their applications correctly. Do you have 2FA? Are you monitoring this? Yes to all. Yes.
Yep.
And so they get accepted, but they get accepted without verification. Then when an incident occurs, they think that they're going to get paid out. But when the insurance company goes in and says, show me proof that you had all these things in there, and they got nothing, now it's going to turn into a legal battle because the company was sure that they're going to pay out regardless of the breach, and they're not going to get paid at all.
And one other thing, I heard this a couple of years ago from a well-respected Toronto cybersecurity researcher, networking guy. He's well known across the speaking circuit. And in between gigs, he got hired by insurance companies to audit compliance at mid-size enterprises and above. And so they didn't have a breach. They filled their insurance forms, they sent it out. And one day the insurance company sent him in and said, I'm here to actually test and see what you got compared to what you filled out. So he walked in, saw they had a lot of shelfware, a lot of stuff that they checked boxes, but weren't actually doing. Wrote up his report. The insurance company didn't just pull the cyber insurance. They pulled all of their coverage. Now, it was a hell of a wake-up moment. And again, this was not a small business. This is a mid-sized company. So FYI, mid-size and above, these insurance companies actually want you to do the things that Dana is talking about, to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And you might find yourself in a real bad way, particularly if you're a CIO or CTO who's signing off on these things and they're not being done.
Yeah, I had a discussion with the CEO of Zensurance last week, and one of the things he pointed out that some insurance companies will help you if you ask. They will provide that. Maybe not all of them, but so if you're looking at cyber insurance, don't get yourself caught into a place that Terry was describing, where you out of ignorance, you think, yeah, we got this. You phone your IT guy, you say, got this. I've gotten the calls. Do we have this? Do we have this? Do we have this? Somebody wants us to certify it, So before you do that, just check to see whether those companies can provide you with some assistance so you can understand your policy. It's just a good thing to understand, when am I going to get paid and when am I not, particularly if you're a small company, because you're not going to sue an insurance company. You're not that crazy.
Well, and even in the case of, exactly. In the case of the city of St. John, so they had an insurance policy. They got hit for $3 million. They did have to battle it out in court to see how much of the $3 million they cover. And what we got really interesting is the other side of when insurance does pay. A lot of times people are like, oh, blank check to cover all the technical debt of all the things that we didn't have. Insurance is like, no, man, if you were running Windows 2013, guess what you're getting back? You're not getting Windows 2021. You're getting Windows 2013 server, buddy. And that's the way it goes. So many folks have been accustomed to insurance as risk transfer. And in some ways, that's the way that it was actually sold and conceptualized. And it's not about transferring the risk, because you're not. You're still, if you are not doing the right things and the bad thing happens, the punch is going to hurt more. Insurance is like having a Kevlar vest and you get shot. It still hurts. Like, it's not like, oh, I got shot. It just didn't kill you. So start thinking about it as, it's cool. I like having my Kevlar vest. I want to make sure I'm wearing my Kevlar vest properly, but it's not like, I'm Iron Man. That's not the
I was
deal.
surprised when I started working with cyber insurance to do incident response, the systems had to be restored to the point before the attack. So if all their systems were outdated, you had to revert back to that version. You couldn't install the latest version, or else they wouldn't pay it. They're not going to pay for upgrades. They're just going to bring you back to the point before the attack.
I'm still wondering whether Shipley's actually worn a Kevlar vest and been shot. Sorry.
So let's keep going with David getting shot. Injuries that I sustained years ago didn't seem like a big deal. But as the years have gone on and I get up in the morning and wonder what that ache and pain is from, it's usually from something earlier. And if I draw that parallel from that analogy of David getting shot, surviving, but will probably hurt down the road, back to business. Long ago, we used to think if you were breached, your business was doomed, right? You were probably going to be doomed. And we've all since turned that corner to realize we can still survive as a business being breached. But I think we're getting business buy-in now and business understanding that, but we are crippled. Running legacy, having a lot of technical debt, having a culture that doesn't learn from that breach, we're destined to repeat it. Our market cap trajectory is drastically altered after a breach. So we might not have died, but we are forever hurt. We're forever wounded. And our ability to shift from that really is a business transformation change. It really is a cultural shift. Because to your point, Terry, I think we all have the impression that, similar to in our home or car insurance, you have replacement value. And they're not going to give you back the 2017 Civic they're probably going to give you a newer Civic or whatever it is you may have. But in the IT land, they are going to replace what you had and not give you top of the line. It's not going to be the same. So we can't exactly drop the legacy that we had or the technical
It's in the
debt.
fine print.
It's the bottom of our vest. Yeah.
Wow. We're going to move on from David's, unless there's a confession you want to make, David, at this point. We're going to move on to another story. The city of Columbus. And this one particularly affects me because I got, and thank you to all of the people who do provide tips. We do get them. Editorial at technewsday. You can find it on the site. You can find me on LinkedIn. One of the things that the shame on this was I couldn't go with this story earlier because I had to make sure I could protect the identity of the person. And I wanted to make sure that the story had hit, but we did cover it. And the city of Columbus was hit 6 terabytes of data taken. And it includes everything: city employee payroll, police officer information, including undercover officers, domestic crime victims, criminal complaint records, fire departments' reports on accidents, driver's license information, city hall for the past 20 years, video surveillance, children who have been attacked or been molested, door proximity card data, all of these sorts of things. Can anybody spot what the problem is here?
That's a lot of data. I mean, the kitchen sink, in there as well. What was interesting about Columbus is it's the second major U.S. jurisdiction to kind of come out and say, nothing to see here, everything's okay. In fact, the mayor made some statements. It was like, we were using encryption and there's no major harm from this breach. It turns out that a local security researcher went to the ransomware gang's data repository, looked at it, and actually gave the insights to this. And then they sued him and said they actually have a temporary restraining order. So literally, he is the only person not allowed to go back to this data set and do anything more with it. It's great protection. Got that 1 at 8 billion, got that nailed down legally. And then he can still do media interview about what he found while they sort out this. And the city is potentially going to sue him out of the civil side. And there's a famous effect called the Streisand effect, where you actually, in trying to cover something up, you get way more attention on it than you ever would have received otherwise. Because I want to be honest, another city getting hit, Baltimore, Atlanta, I can name off cities until I'm blue in the face. Not unique to Columbus. But this one, trying to sue somebody, is like what happened in Missouri when the reporter found that there was a flaw in HTML coding on a web page. And they're like, that reporter hacked us. No, it's called view source, right? And that was the governor, waving the flag on that one. So yeah, it's startling. And yeah, it's just, you almost need legal protections for people in good faith, acting in the public interest, holding public bodies accountable to prevent this kind of abuse in the legal system.
I'll share a story that happened to me. So, we have access to things like showdown.io. We could pull information out, show you, the potential client, what's vulnerable about you online. I'm an advisor for many companies. I go in there and show them their stuff. And all of a sudden you'll have one guy that'll say, well, who gave you authorization to do this? I'm like, dude, this is public information. I'm here to help you. The bad guys are not going to give you this report on a silver platter, right? I am here to show, here's the report. There's the remediation steps. There's your risk. You don't even need me. Here's the remediation steps. The bad guys are not going to give you this, but you always have that one guy in the crowd that's like, who gave you authorization to scan us or take this report? But we didn't scan you. You're being scanned all the time by various threat actors. So
The thing, yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to when open source Intel certainly became a thing, right? And it amazed me how many people were saying, well, how do you know that? What wild magic did you do to achieve that? It draws two things to my mind. One is on the human side. So I'll go back to the human element side of that too. But the other side is that education. And I fear that some of the wording, and I was just looking up some of the press release on some of this, is being done more as almost a little bit more as propaganda, or as this is what I think we could lead the narrative to, that's not necessarily grounded in fact or grounded in certain elements of truth to what actually went on. Because to your point, the civil suit probably sounds great that, oh, they're taking action, they're doing something, they're fighting back. But unfortunately, it really isn't going to solve anything in the way it's being conducted. So great idea, really badly executed would be unfortunately the thought. But the larger part when I look at this as well is that human element. And this is the part that starts to scare me with a lot of our cyber attacks. We're leaning into the phishing attacks are not just we've exfiltrated data, we've encrypted data, we've locked data, we've done something to your network. It's, by the way, we now have garage codes to your home. We've accessed your Ring camera in your home. Was this your daughter walking into your home the other day? Every executive's heart starts to palpitate when they hear things like that. So the extortion of the individual, and now this level of data to have children's information, undercover police officers, domestic situations. We don't know the ramifications of when and how that can be used. And that scares me a lot.
And Dana, you talked about the fact that that being hacked is not the end of your business. What seems to be a clear factor, though, that we saw this with CrowdStrike. I got to give them full credit. You can dump on them all you want for the mistakes they made. I give them full credit for coming out and saying it was us, we did it, our bad. And even their CEO coming up and saying, this is wrong, shouldn't have happened. And people saying, are you crazy? People are going to sue you. I mean, I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that and make that point in court. But this is particularly frustrating for me, and I get dumped on for sharing sometimes my frustrating opinions. This is not the first time I've seen places that say, we're transparent, will slam you with a lawsuit when you talk about things that actually happen. And picking on this consultant is the lowest of the low. And second only to the company that tried to sue us because we went back to them and said, we found out you've been hacked. Somebody gave us a tip. We found this information on the dark web. They turned around and sent a lawyer's letter, small publication. We're not, and the next one, and just so you're on notice, anybody out there wants to send me a lawyer's letter at this point, we will comply and we will blast your name across our 10,000 listeners to let them know what a schmuck you are. And I think this hiding of this and making this a political thing is going to blow up in their face, I hope.
But this goes back to culture, right? And the way that we frame these incidents as blame and guilt and shame, the leadership of the city, they're going through the same levels of psychological stress and feeling almost like they were physically under threat. When you go through a data breach like this, it's now fight or flight. And well, obviously we've seen the fight come out and just trying to do that side of it. But I understand on that very human level, what influences were powering the drive to do this. I do agree that Jim, I think that they shot at the wrong, this guy's not the bad guy. But how we look at this as a society and say, you know what, it does matter how you handle a breach, how you communicate with it matters. The classic example in Canadian public relations that's taught now probably till time immemorial was McCain Foods when they had the Listeria crisis. And they came, just like CrowdStrike, they at the senior level, they got out there, they owned it, they explained how it happened, they apologized, they were right out there in front of it. And that's the moment. And if I just sort of refocus on that for municipal leaders, you're probably going to have a breach. The nature of the IT architecture, the underinvestment in this area, the pressures you're under, et cetera. What happened in Columbus is probably coming to you at some point. How you learn from it, how you communicate from it, how you approach this with humility is important. But reacting this way, not helping you.
Completely agreed. I'd offer as well the London drugs response. Feedback on that was very strong because of, to your point, Jim, the transparency. We see the challenges, right? And the manual effort that organization strove to until their systems were back up. It begs the question, doesn't it, of we all understand fire drills. I think as children, we were in our schools having fire drills. We knew if the fire went off, we knew where to go, how to exit the building, where to meet as a class. Fast forward many decades, we still have fire drills in our offices. We all know what to do. It baffles me of why organizations, when we say incident response planning, 9 times out of 10, the response I receive is we have a retainer, thank you. Have we tested it? Have we brought in the SLT to know in this situation, let's say City of Columbus, London drugs happens tomorrow. Do we have that? Have you felt that moment of how do I respond? My comms team has a business response plan, which is brilliant. That's a great starting point. But I would love to see the way we've got, usually, I think by regulations, we've got certain time frame that we have to have fire drills. Why don't we have regulations, especially on municipalities, government entities, to say, you've done not just a tabletop, I mean an actual breach response simulation on how your business would be responding in various use cases.
Going back to the story I shared earlier about the customer, I kept checking off, I have all this stuff.
Yeah.
Part of the question was, do you have an incident response plan? And his answer was, call my IT provider. So for fun, I call up the IT provider and I'm like, hey, did you know you're on the list for incident response? I am. It's like, what do I do? So it didn't make any sense. So, you have to understand that IT is like your family doctor, right? Would you ever ask your doctor to perform laser eye surgery on you? And most people would say no. And that's where a cybersecurity firm or expert will come in and complement the IT guys, make sure it's all ironclad, because there's going to be areas that we're going to see that maybe they missed, and vice versa.
And when I go back to the thought about that incident response simulation, the value of not just doing this as a script reading, but actually making it as realistic as possible so that you can start to experience in a safe, controlled way some of that anxiety, some of that fear, some of that uncertainty. And you can realize at the time of the simulation, I don't like these feelings. I don't like this. I would rather be better prepared. What are the things that I'm actually missing to be better prepared? I did, it was kind of it wasn't a tabletop, but it was a public sector body. It wasn't as fulsome as I think what Dana just described, somewhere in between. And we were going through this scenario of a ransomware attack, and it was in a higher education institution. And at first it was, oh yeah, we got this. And then of course we had conspired with the VP of IT and the CISO to start escalating. And it was all based on real events that had happened to somebody else. And so all of a sudden the pressure started to rise. And all of a sudden I was like, I don't like this. And the most interesting that came of this is they didn't know this. They said, we don't actually know how our provincial government expects us to respond. We're an independent body under the law, but we're still ultimately accountable. And no one in the room of the Board of Governors really had a strong sense of, geez, what are the norms that we're expected? That was the most valuable thing to come out of that, was that we created that uncertainty and discomfort. And we better get better direction on this so we can plan.
Yeah, which is brilliant. I think every time we run simulations, and I know we've got some cyber ranges around that are wonderfully attended and they're impactful. And one of the things I'll say is one of the findings that I appreciate out of it as well is the age-old question of when do you tell your shareholders? When do you inform or involve law enforcement? If you can ask your SLT independently and they all give you the same answer, good on you. Many can't. If not, I would offer that most can't offer that or answer that consistently within their breach response. And then that begs, when we talk about the hygiene to avoid some of these situations, because our sysadmins are all really brilliant. Truly, they've got fantastic skills. I only just wish we could clone them. But the direction they take or the programs that they're administering are based on SLT decisions. And if the senior leadership teams are, quite frankly, juggling an awful lot and trying to gain market share and keep their business innovating and growing in the direction they want it to, they've got an internal threat. And that's the program around their technology debt, how we shift that. Cyber range is a great exposure to softly and yet impactfully say, this is on you. You will be making these decisions. You will be the one that Jim will be calling saying, I've heard that this has gone on. Do you have a statement for us?
Yeah. And I want to ask this question because I think if you're listening to this program right now, maybe if you're in IT, maybe you're not, and you're saying, okay, but where do I go to do this? Where do I start? And I'm thinking we could do a whole episode on this, but I don't go to my IT group. Where do I go to get the help to get that, what I'm going to call a resilience plan or recovery plan or communication plan, those things? Because I think David, you're right. Everybody gets hit. Every single company is either been hit or they didn't find out where they've been hit. They're sitting there like these guys. A year later, they'll figure out they got hit. but everybody gets hit. Where do you go? And you can be shameless promoters on this and talk about your company and types of company. I don't care. But where would I start if I was a business and I was hearing this and I took your advice?
So I'll say this, the role that my company plays is our job is to help motivate people to make good decisions about technology so they reduce cyber risk and they can thrive digitally. So our job is to start building that motivation to do it and then to go off to experts, and I'm sure Dana and Terry can talk about that service part of the work. This is where partners that we work take it to the next level. So, we think about security awareness a lot, like compliance, boom, 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 yelled at people about passwords, told them not to click on phishing, check the box, I'm insured certified. But you can use your awareness program to motivate people throughout the organization from frontline to senior leadership about making better decisions. And then you work with, it's almost like professional athletes work with a team of folks to optimize their performance. And that includes, the physiotherapy, the psychological aspects, other parts of it to help you get that peak performance so you can, be secure and competitive. But I'll leave it to the others to go further.
Well, one of the things we're seeing is that a lot of companies go to their law firm that they work with, and usually they have a breach coach available to them. And the breach coach will then ask them a bunch of questions like, you have your incident response plan set up? If you do, then let's see it. Who do you call first? Who do you call second? And a lot of times these incident response plans are not even detailed enough. It just says, call my IT guy. He's got it all covered, but he has no clue he's on the list. And then from there, they'll bring in experts like you just mentioned. So we'll get brought in as an example to audit them. Let's see where you are now, where you need to be, where you should be. So we'll run some audits and kind of highlight where their weak spots are so we can help lock that down to prevent a breach.
Awesome. And I would offer, and thank you for the opportunity, because my background was as a developer, so certainly more techno, but as the years have gone on, I've wanted to take a step back and really look at it more of the macro level. And if I make the analogy to, we all know healthy diet, exercise, lots of sleep are good things for our bodies. When an inevitable does happen, as we have the privilege of getting older and we have a cancer diagnosis, an accident, anything that happens to our bodies, our ability to recover from that is usually based on how we were earlier. Were we eating a good diet? Were we getting regular exercise? Were our bodies relatively healthy? That will bode well going forward. And the analogy I make for there is within IBM, we really do focus on being that trusted advisor to upfront, to be that preventative, strong hygiene services for the organization, that when the inevitable happens or when a situation happens, or even when we're just concerned that it might be, we're ready, we're prepared. In the industry, we call that the left of the boom. When the boom occurs, don't get me wrong, we certainly spend an awful lot of time right of the boom. A breach has occurred. We have probably heard of our X-Force team for incident response retainer, whether you're on retainer or not. They can be providing that forensic information to legal authorities or even just working with you. One of the things that I especially appreciate of our services is it provides back that assurance to say, yes, indications of compromise have been removed. Now let's set up that program again. Because even if we haven't eaten well, slept well, we've treated our bodies with a bit of, fraternity debauchery, we can always improve. And now is the time where we can improve. And that's where an IBM, that's what I spend a lot of my days on, are what are the services to go with any technology to make that organization as healthy as it can be.
And in many ways, I'll add this, is we get two kinds of calls. Third of the time, it's proactive. And it's usually, this just happened to somebody I know, and I don't want this to happen to us. And so it's like, oh, we're going to use that come to the table moment. 2/3 of the time, we're what we're going to call day 2, day 3 activity. So day 0, boom. Day 1, recovering from the boom. Day 2 and 3, don't want boom to happen again. Mm-hmm. The work that Dana just mentioned, the healthy lifestyle, it takes time. It takes deliberate effort. There is no silver bullet to it, but people are here to help. And by the way, I'll wrap with this. Cybersecurity people, we love getting you healthy. Like everyone thinks that we're adrenaline junkies, and there's a moment of fun where you're young in your career and you're dealing with breaches and you're right in the moment. But when you mature in this space, you love seeing people successful and thriving, and you want to prevent the boom from happening, and you want to get them back on the road after it happens. And we'd have a much happier industry if more people came to us with that preventative primary healthcare model in mind.
I'll leave with my advice on this. And Dana, I headed consulting for a major firm internationally as well. And I think I've always put this together is don't be afraid to call somebody just because they've got 3 letters in their name. You will find many cases they can either get you to resources, or if you're a potential client, they'll talk to you. You don't have to buy anything. Just talk to them before, because I'm going to tell you, when you have to buy it, when it's the day after the attack, it's a lot less interesting call for you and a lot more painful. One of the biggest law firms in Toronto that does breaches did a whole show with us, and I will replay that. I'm going to replay that on #trending next weekend, just so everybody can see what the concept of a breach coach is, and you can see how much information is available for you if you just reach out and ask somebody. That's
Maybe I can add one more point. I do a lot of keynote talks. I have a version on our website at cyologylab.com/start. It's basically companies that have reached out to me 4 years after they've seen me present. And they had some questions, and I'm like, well, what took you so long to ask this stuff, right? Well, then they said, well, you know how to get started. So this presentation is all about how and why hackers are getting in. And throughout the presentation, you're going to have access to free audits. They'll actually audit your system for free and show you where you are now, where you need to be, and get you kickstarted at no cost, no risk, no contract, nothing. So that's available.
Check out the show notes. We'll put some links if you panelists want to send me some stuff into resources. It's a lot easier to deal with it before you get hacked. I'm going to bring a couple quick stories up here. One, because this one happened this week. I don't know if anybody's ever done this, but they've, talking to someone, I talked to my wife about this. She said, I was on my cell phone talking to somebody, and 15 minutes later, an ad pops up for the same thing. Coincidence? I think not, she says. And of course, me being the tech genius around the house says, oh, come on, I'll show you how things work and how cookies work and all this sort of stuff. But they can't possibly be tapping your phone or taking information from your phone. Well, I'm hoping she's not watching this show because, oh God, was I wrong. I actually found an example of that this week. Your Android phone could listen in on you and report this back. And the company that was doing it they called it active listening. And they listed on their website 3 major companies. Facebook was one of them, I think, and Meta was another, of course, that they were partnered with. Now, all of this stuff has come off the web now. And since this got revealed, all of a sudden, people are talking about Facebook saying, we're reviewing this and Meta's taking it down and this company's taking this information down. But we found somebody who actually saved a lot of these things. And it was amazing. Has anybody heard of this story? Or
have you seen a documentary on Netflix? I believe it's called The Great Hack, but it's where you've kind of you're predictable. So when you go online, you look for something, they have so many data points on you that they know what you're about to think next. So it's all been pre-programmed that they know what you're thinking about. And that's how it pops up. So it's a really interesting Netflix story. I got to check if it's called The Great Hack.
We'll put the link in if you find it, Terry. Yeah.
This story doesn't surprise me in the sense that we've seen narratives emerge before. There was a company in the US that actually was making free children's apps on the Play Store. And in the terms of service, the exchange of value was when the app was running, the microphone of the phone was activated. What they wanted to do at the time was have the phone pick up what advertisements were playing in the background on television nearby. So they could actually validate that people were actually seeing or experiencing the advertising that was happening. And so it was really, really interesting to see that play out. And a privacy researcher found it, lost their minds, and that was shut down. A shout out to 404 Media for highlighting this. This is, again, small independent publisher doing really good specialized work in this space, telling stories that matter and exposing things. We wouldn't have known about this group and their ties, and they were tied to like the premier Facebook ad network. They were an Amazon partner. There was lots of stuff on the go. How many people have read the terms of service on their Google Smart TV that was on a really sweet deal? The TVs are all relatively the same, roughly the same quality, made in the same factory. The couple $100 price difference is you are giving your data up. And that data is collected, aggregated, weaponized, and used to influence the choices that you make. That's the value exchange. And it can be everything from, well, geez, now I use this brand of toothpaste and not that big of a deal, to these are my political views now, possibly a bigger deal. And what I can say is this: in Canada, there's not a hope of hell of reining this in right now. C27 is so mired in the muck, that is Canada's modernization of its privacy laws, that it's not going to happen. Federal privacy legislation in the States, not gonna happen. I mean, we'll see if democracy, how that plays out for the next 4 years before we worry about that next stage. So ain't gonna get any better. You've got to pay attention yourself as a consumer, and you got to realize that the data that you give up is going to be used, and they will do it, right? This is the marketer's golden dream, is to be able to say, I've got voice of the customer. They just talked about a hamburger. Hit them with that Wendy's ad right now.
So the name of that show I was talking about, it's actually not called The Great Hack. It's called The Social Dilemma. It's where they show how the big tech companies are using algorithms to influence your buying patterns, and they're showing you ads based on things. It's really good documentary.
As consumers, we need to be a little bit more critical, right? The ease of use of adding something to these little devices that provide us the world at our fingertips, we need to realize that our actions are choices, and who we're leaning into and what we're leaning into has to be done in a way that we're rewarding people who are good custodians of our data. Is if I bring this back to our breaches, in the Poneman and IBM study, 63% of breached corporations admitted, because the other 37%, I think, do it, they just didn't say it, to downloading the cost of a breach to a consumer. It's not that they've got a pot of money sitting on the side saying, when I hit a breach, I've got all of this money to take this. We've just talked about insurance earlier. So if we're using, to your point, we've got listening devices on the apps that we're downloading, and that data is then exposed, the breach of that data, we are creating an absolute spiral. And what are we going to become, David? We're going to become breach poor. That our organizations are servicing debt after the fact. And as much as it's really cool that I can go over to my husband's iPad or phone and certainly mention in some activities that I'd want. Yes, I do want to golf next week, and I'd like some new golf clubs. And it's great that he then get that proliferated into his feed. Joking aside, I've now given my data and my choice to a company that is not a good custodian of me. They're not going to make this economy a better economy.
Yeah, but Dana, they take your security very seriously, and they'll do everything to protect it, right?
And they have disclosed this. That was one of the things that came up in this, and I'll close out with that, was that one of the things that I read on this, somebody said, is this legal? And someone else had retrieved this thing that had, again, been mysteriously deleted. And yes, in the terms of the service, it says somewhere on page 52 in fine print, yes, you agree to this active listening piece. I guess I don't know what the answer is. I'm never going to read all of these things. I've heard of an AI program that will actually read terms of service and summarize them for you. But aside from that, I don't know what we do.
Actually, Apple gave a good snapshot of what we could be moving towards. Now in their app transparency, they created kind of like the nutrition guide for privacy. But I think we need to take that to the tobacco level, where it's like, this app is bad for your digital health. Facebook should have absolutely like examples like mental duress and other things.
It has to have those rotting teeth.
Yeah.
This app will lead you in voting in anti-democratic ways and question your body self-image. So, no.
We're running really late. David, can we save your story till next week, or did you want to just quickly run through that?
No, that's fine. One quick thing. Disney actually backed down. Remember we talked a couple weeks ago about how signing up for a Disney Plus trial then meant you couldn't sue them if they killed your spouse allegedly with a allergen in a restaurant. So Disney realized that the massive public backlash to applying a streaming service terms of service to a legal dispute over food poisoning, it didn't make a lot of sense. So yay, we can win. So I'll leave it that point.
David Shipley once again has moved the needle for all of you out there, and we're amazed. Thanks so much to my panel. David Shipley, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
And of course, Terry Cutler, once again, a stellar contribution.
Thank you for having me.
And Dana Proctor. Dana, you have to come back. There's just no doubt about this.
I would love to. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for spending part of your weekend with us. I'll be back with the cybersecurity news on Monday morning. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.